Thank you for manning the chat too, because when the chat's on, it's hard to focus on question you're answering when there's a million questions.
Yeah,
Right.
well, and you never know what you're going to get. And we have some authors that get some extremely controversial stuff going. And so that's why we don't allow it live. It won't be the case with you, but.
Speaking of live, we are live.
Oh, we are live. Well,
yeah.
wonderful, Patrick.
Yeah. Do you want me to do my? Yeah.
Right.
Good evening, everybody.
Why don't you do your thing?
I'll do my thing. Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Barbara Peters. And we're really delighted to have debut novelist Ramona Emerson, filmmaker. I'll read your whole bio here in a second, to discuss her really wonderful new book, Shutter. And our friend David, I'm going to blow it, David Heska Wanbli Weiden, I got it, is joining us, who wrote off the wonderful debut Winter Counts. And we've heard that he might have a new book in progress. So we're very excited about that. But David has very kindly agreed to come in and host, be a guest host for tonight's program. But Barbara, should I go ahead and give them, I want to read both their bios because they're so interesting. Ramona is a Dene writer and filmmaker originally from, is it Todacheene, New Mexico? Close enough, sorry. She has a bachelor's in media arts from the University of New Mexico and an MFA in creative writing from the Institute of American Indian Arts. After starting in forensic videography, she embarked upon a career as a photographer, writer, and editor. She's an Emmy nominee, a Sundance Native Lab Fellow, a Time Warner Storyteller Fellow, a Tribeca All Access Grantee, and a WGBH Producer Fellow. In 2020, Emerson was appointed to the Governor's Council on Film and Media Industries for the state of New Mexico. She currently resides in Albuquerque, where she and her husband, the producer Kelly Byers, run their production company, which I love the title of, Real Indian Pictures. Shutters is her first novel. And so great to have you here, Ramona.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
let me give David's bio here. David Heska Wanbli Weiden, an enrolled citizen of the, is it Sikanju or Sikang? Is that close?
Sichangu.
Sorry, Lakota, I can do that nation, was named by the New York Times as one of the most critically acclaimed young novelists working now. His debut novel, Winter Counts, was called a once-in-a-generation thriller by the Los Angeles Times, a worthy addition to the burgeoning canon of Indigenous literature by Library Journal, and one of the best crime novels of all time by Parade magazine. Weiden is the first Native American author to win an Anthony Award and the Thriller Award, and the second to be nominated for the Edgar Award. His short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies and has been selected for the Best American Mystery and Suspense Stories. There we go. Welcome, David.
Well, let me start off by saying thank you, of course, to the Poison Pen, the best bookstore in the world. I'm so thrilled and honored to be here, and especially with my good friend, Ramona Emerson. Let me give a little bit of background before we get into it, but I do want to say, folks that are watching, there will be time to do some questions and answers at the end. So if you have some questions, feel free to type them into the box, whatever platform you are watching, and we would be thrilled to have Ramona address some of those. So delighted to be here. Let me talk a little bit about our time together, Ramona. So you and I met almost exactly 10 years ago. You and I were in the first class of the MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So IAIA, as it is known, had created a brand new Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program, and we were in the first class. Now, I did not finish on time. The program had some hiccups in the early years. I did graduate in 18, but I believe you graduated in 15. Did you graduate on time? Is that right? So we were indeed in the first class. So we met each other then. We workshopped together. And so just what a wonderful honor it is to be with you tonight on the release of your debut novel. Now, I've got a bound manuscript here. I don't have even an ARC or the final version.
This is the ARC.
Yeah, there it is. There's the ARC. Okay.
All three versions are represented.
know, right?
Patrick has the real book because Ramona was kind enough to sign it for us. There's her signature. And it is, in fact, our August 1st mystery book of the month. And David, you recall that when your wonderful book published, Winter Counts, you were a first mystery book of the month. So we've been doing that for 30 years because the store turns 33 in October. It's really amazing if we go back and look at those 12 books a year at what they were.
Yeah.
So thank you both for, for adding luster.
I'm so excited too, introducing them. I forgot to do the business stuff, which is we do have autographed copies of Shutter, as Barbara just said, and I will put a link in the comments field should you like to snap up one of the few remaining ones that we have. So, and if you have questions, as David said, if you have questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat field, and I'll be happy to ask any of them towards the end of the hour.
So let me just say that the original Poison Pen in Indian Native American fiction for us wasn't Native American fiction. This will not surprise you. It was Tony Hillerman. I remember reading The Blessing Way. And in fact, it was through The Blessing Way, Ramona, that I even knew about Navajo ghosts, which are a significant part of Shutter. And then over the years, we had James Doss, who wrote about the Ute, and we had Margaret Cole, who wrote to some degree about the Arapaho and all, but there was really no Native voice, even though we did super well with all of these books and people were fascinated with them. So I am just delighted that we're now seeing a serious
well, there was Lewis Owens, and there was
yeah, that's true.
my hero, James Welch.
Right? Yeah, I know I'm not catching all of them, but with many of them were not in fact authentic voices, but rather people who were fascinated and learned a lot. And I don't know, Ramona, I mean, you're Navajo, so you could speak to it, but I was always under the impression that Tony's books were respected, if not admired. Would that be true, or am I just imagining it? Or don't you want to say, because I'm putting you on the spot?
Well, I think that there are a certain group of people who support Tony Hillerman, who are fans of Tony Hillerman, and some of those include Navajos. I know Navajos who are into Tony Hillerman, and they like that whole narrative. But when I was growing up, I remember the thing my grandma would always tell me is, I don't know who is telling him all this stuff. Like, who is giving him all this information? It's like criminal. And for me, that's what I always remember. So I feel like in a lot of his books, he talks about things that we all know not to talk about. And I think that's a big mistake that people who are outsiders who write about Native communities make, because they don't understand the basic ins and outs and the cultural beliefs and traditions of people that they're writing about. And in Tony Hillerman's case, he knew, like, he was doing his research, and he was talking to people and doing interviews, and he knew that you don't talk about that stuff, but he did anyway. I mean, he would know if he was listening to what they were telling him. So I find it hard to, well, for up till now, really, aside from poetry, there hasn't been a lot of Navajo representation at all in fiction or nonfiction, for that matter. And so for a long time, for many years, a lot of people depended on Tony Hillerman to tell them about Navajo culture, and including some Navajos. And it's kind of sad to say, but it's true. It's been like that for a long time. So I think programs like IAIA are changing that, because for now we're finally getting a chance to, take our stories back and bring them back to where they should be, which is in our own communities.
Ramona, so, do you know Laura Tohe?
I know of her, but I don't know her personally.
Yeah, she lives here in town and is a good friend and really wonderful poet. And she wrote a story for an anthology I put together called Phoenix Noir, which was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. That'd be a fun collection. Yeah. So I mean, just looking at the breadth of the talent that's going through right now, as far as Navajo poetry, like Jake Skeets and of course, Lucy Tabahanzo, and there's so many more that are going to be coming out and that are going to be putting collections out into the world. And so it's a great time. It's a really great time. But I do wish that we had a little bit more Native representation in fiction and nonfiction, and it's happening. It's just slow going, but it's happening.
Wonderful. Well, that was actually the point I was going towards, was how exciting to see the two of you and recognize that, in fact, it is happening. So, David, let me just read your wonderful comment about Shudder, and then I'm going to shut up and turn this all over to you. But I was so moved by it. David wrote a wonderful paragraph here. Get ready for the next wave of Indigenous thrillers. Shudder is a soulful, mesmerizing exploration of the paranormal set against the backdrop of New Mexico and the Navajo Nation. Written in tough, edgy prose, this book grabs you by the shoulders, oh, I love that, and refuses to let you leave. Ramona Emerson is a welcome new voice in Native literature. That's a really powerful and very generous statement, David.
Well, it's completely deserved, and I want to turn to Shudder for a moment. But Patrick, let me pick up on piggyback on something you said. The news is starting to get out. I am editing a new collection for Akashic called Native Noir. Oh. Now, it will be all Native authors writing crime stories. Now, you may know that there was a volume that Akashic put out called Indian Country Noir that had largely non-Native authors. Akashic approached me and said, would you be willing to edit a new collection of strictly Native authors writing crime, dark noir stories? And I said I would be delighted. And so this is still coming together. I have about 6 or 8 of the stories in. It's still taking shape, but that's an exciting thing coming down the pike. But let me turn to Ramona, because this is such an exciting time. So again, I knew Ramona back in the day, and I knew Ramona as a filmmaker. And so if you don't know, folks, Ramona Emerson is a widely acclaimed documentary filmmaker. And so when I read this book, I was literally just blown away. If you don't know, the book is told in alternating timelines. Rita, the heroine of the book, in her childhood and growing up and current day. And it is absolutely compelling and riveting. I probably preferred the younger chapters more, but they were both so wonderful. And there's a wonderful conceit as well. I don't think it's giving away any spoilers to say that Rita is a photographer who can see the dead. And that's just an amazing construct to begin with. So Ramona, my first question for you is, tell us how Shudder came to be. How did your background as a filmmaker and a photographer influence the writing of the book?
Well, initially, I started as a documentary project, or I thought of it maybe as a documentary project. And it was really more along the lines of, how do Navajos who work in certain industries that involve death, how do they cope traditionally, spiritually, because we're so afraid of death? Like, how do pathologists or police officers or doctors who happen to be Dene deal with that? And slowly I began to realize that people most likely aren't really going to want to talk to me about that, specifically because it's such a taboo. And I had been working in forensics as a videographer in a private firm, so it's much less exciting than the stuff you see on TV. So it's a lot of depositions and measuring and spending a lot of time out on accident scenes and measuring gashes in the asphalt. Real exciting stuff, right? Most of the time it's not very exciting. And I had a few cases that I had worked on that were very disturbing to me. And at the same time, I was getting ready to quit that job, just because it was getting hard to work as a filmmaker, and then to work with this very cantankerous boss that I had, who I had worked for 16 years, and he was driving me crazy, and we just weren't getting along anymore. And I was like, okay, I'm quitting the job. I'm going to have this writing workshop. I'm going to start going to up in northern New Mexico, and we're going to start our own business, and we're going to start doing our own vibe, our own video business. And we did. We just started doing it on our own. And I went to this writing workshop where I started writing these little stories about grandma, and little stories about like spooky things that would happen on the res. And at that time, the IAA MFA program was starting, and I thought, wow, this is awesome, because we can go to school and not have to be in campus every day, and I can afford this program, and I can, learn about screenwriting, because originally I was going to go as a screenwriter. So I asked my mentor, Joan Tewksbury, to write me a letter of recommendation for the MFA program, and she refused. She refused to write me a letter of recommendation unless I went into fiction. She was like, if you're going into screenwriting, I'm not writing that. That's what she said. Your stories are so great. You need to start writing fiction. You need to stop with the screenwriting. Just do the stories. So I thought maybe I'd come out of there with a collection of short stories or something like that. But when I started there, like within the first class with Eden Robinson, I knew exactly where this was going. And right at the same time, I attended the 16-week Albuquerque Police Department civil training. So like, you know, any civilian can come in and take this 16-week course at APD. And they teach you everything you want to know about forensics. And they walk you through APD cases. They teach you about ballistics, blood spatter, how to pull fingerprints, like everything. And it was like all the points just started connecting, and I started writing the book. And you saw some early drafts, like in workshop. We read a few of those crazy early drafts, and people were asking me like, what are the rules of the ghost world? And like, it was like so fragmented in a million different places, and the chapters were too short and in the wrong order, and it was just insanity. So you saw some of that early crazy drafting, but that's how it started. Like I say, within that first 6 months of being in the program and taking this other class and all of it coming together, just kind of a circumstance of it, it just became what it is. And I knew it was just like a light bulb went off. Like, these stories are her childhood, these stories that I've been writing about, these ghost things need to be incorporated into my own experiences doing forensics. And it was just like it just came together. And I started it.
You know, so I was surprised to learn that you had actually did this crime scene photography. And I'm going to jump ahead with the questions I'm asking here. Tell us about the opening scene, which is pretty visceral. Okay, I don't want to give too much away. Was that hard to write?
Yes, I think it was mostly hard to write because it started out as like a 2-page little splinter chapter that was in that mess of chapters that I was writing. And I never thought of it as anything more than that. But after workshop, a couple of times people said, we need more of this. Like, why aren't you doing more of this? This is like really creepy, and it kind of disturbs me. And it was like, oh, really? I mean, I think I kind of was like, oh, this is excellent. I can expand on this. I can do this. But that particular scene is a real scene. It was one of the first cases that I learned about at that APD forensics case or case study. And it was a real case that happened. In that case, I changed facts about, you know, whether it was a suicide or it was an accident. All that was changed. The names were changed. All of that was changed. But that case, that to me, like that thing, I thought we saw the photograph from the scene, and he was just describing it to us. And I remember being in class writing all this stuff down, and he was like, she was in pieces. Like, this is like the cop was describing the scene and just talking to us about how her body was just in fragments on the freeway, and it was cold. It was wintertime, and you couldn't see, and it was snowing. There was all these things that were in it, and I was just like, oh my god, this has to be the opening chapter because it'll grab people. And but was it hard, like, because of the content? No, I think once I knew that was what was gonna get people, it was easy to write that. Because I had all the details. The police had described it to me. I'd seen the photographs. I knew what it was like to be out in the cold photographing stuff in the dark, early mornings. Sometimes it's awful, and you're on call and you got to do that stuff. And so all of those things together made that first chapter. Yeah. So, but yeah, I saw that scene, and a lot of the scenes that are in the book were pulled from either cases that I worked on in videography doing the forensic work, or cases that I learned about at the APD. Forensic.
There was an incredible amount of respect, I thought, in that scene, you know, because it really is a catalog of parts that ultimately traces back to a human being, you know, obviously. And the way that you handled that, I thought was very respectful in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, thank you, because I think, you know, I think my grandma used to get freaked out early on when I was working forensics about what I was taking photos of and what I would see that would come in. And it would freak me out, I think, for the first year or so. And she would make me go to the medicine man, and it would like freak me out seeing what I was seeing. But then it became like you're saying, it was like there was a certain level of respect and a certain level of determination that you needed to have to do the job, because you knew
It's a
that
gutsy way to open the book.
right, if you didn't do the photographs right, then you could jeopardize her case. You could jeopardize her chance at justice. It's a very basic thing. So it's they need justice. You need to find out what happened to them, and that's your job.
And the sheer number of photographs, sorry, David, not to hijack the questions, but the sheer number of photographs we learn at the very, it was 1,015 photos. Really, really interesting.
You take a ton. You take pictures of every little thing, even if it's an object off of the pickup that fell off, or a scuff on the tire, or you take pictures of everything, not just the body, but everything. Yeah.
Sorry, David, back to you.
No, listen, this is fantastic. Again, folks that are watching, I just can't emphasize enough some of the uniqueness of this book. There's stuff in here that you don't see every day, okay? And I think that's what's making this book really powerful. It's bringing in the Navajo perspective. It's bringing in some cool paranormal stuff. It's got just sharp, edgy, wonderful prose. So it was just a pleasure to read. But let me move on, because there was another scene that I made a special note of, was the hospital scene. When Rita goes in, there are a couple of hospital scenes in there, but Rita goes into the hospital, and as she can see spirits, dead people, she's kind of overwhelmed in the hospital. And I was tickled by that as well. It's not a funny scene, but it was interesting to read. Can you tell us a little bit more about that scene and how it came to be?
Yeah, sure. When I was thinking about like Rita's life, and I was kind of like, just doing some brainstorming sessions when I was working out early chapters, and like naming some, like, the what ifs, like what if this happened to Rita, or what's like the scariest place for her, like the place that she doesn't want to be. Was it be a graveyard? Kind of like all these different things. And I thought immediately, no, it's not the graveyard, it's the hospital. Like that would be the worst place for somebody like that, who was like an open portal that could see people, because there's so much suffering happening there, past and present, that it's kind of like, it seems to me like it would be a logical portal for people who are crossing over or not crossing over, or are confused. It's like a crowded bus stop, or a train station. Like that'd be the place, would be the hospital. It's like where everybody's trying to figure out where to go, and are they dead, or are they alive, or who are these people? This is a point of major confusion, I would imagine, for everyone. So I knew that would be her bad place. Right from the beginning, when she's a little girl, she knows like the doctors is a bad place, because these people are there. Like from her childhood, she knows, and so she always knows that's not the place I want to be. For sure. Hospitals, I think, and maybe it's my own fear of going to the hospital. I hate going to the hospital. So
there is a little comic relief in that too, isn't there?
Yeah, maybe that's an underlying tone, my own fear of going to the doctor. But I just thought, I was trying to think of it as a ghost. Like what would be the place I would hang out? Like where would they go before they go on to the next plane? Kind of thinking. And it's weird because we don't know. That's the cool thing about talking about ghosts and afterlife, is because we really don't know what happens to us, and we all have beliefs about our next, incarnation, or none thereof, or whatever people do. But I think that's, whatever it is, that's probably 50 to 70% of the time it's going to be in a hospital, unfortunately, and so that's why that horrible scene came out of that. So I guess my own ghost research.
Let me move on to some other chapters that I loved. There was just so much that I loved about the book. But as I mentioned, I think a few minutes ago, there are two timelines going on here, and I was really moved by the chapters where Rita is growing up, is school, the friends she's made. How much of that did you borrow from your own history? Because I get asked this a lot. I get asked in Winter Counts, how much of it is from you and your own history and all that. And in my case, it's very little, with the exception of my character Nathan, who's based on my son David Jr. Did you tell us about the young Rita chapters? Did you draw from your own experience or not so much?
Well, yeah, I think I did a lot. I mean, I think the mother and father characters, not so much. I think those two characters were just kind of, because they play such a small timeline role within Rita's life, that they really didn't play a factor. For me, my mom and I do get along. You know, my mom is in my life. It's not like Rita. And you know, my dad passed on, but there was a little bit of that. I didn't really know my dad as a kid, you know, so I kind of played in a little bit of that, what it's like to not have a dad, and you know, kind of feel like you've been hatched. And so I threw a little bit of that in for Rita. But the grandma relationship is very much pulled from my own experiences. I was very close to my grandmother. My grandmother took care of me for a good portion of my childhood. But once I was like 7 or 8 years old, I moved in with my mother. So in that way, I did pull some personal experiences into Rita's experience. Most of the family dynamics there aren't really like my family dynamics. I had a big family and a lot of cousins and a lot of aunties and uncles that Rita doesn't really have. I wanted Rita to have a very solitary life, and kind of be alone aside from her grandmother. I really wanted it to be like her and grandma were their each other's everything. Because I sometimes in my own life would feel like that with my grandma. I was so close to her that I felt like that whole scene where she's so worried about her grandma dying, and she's like a little girl, and that's like her biggest fear is her grandma dying, and she like listens to her breath when she's sleeping at night. That kind of stuff I did because I was so terrified of losing my grandma. So yeah, I do pull like emotional cues and things like that from memories I had of my grandmother. We hung out all the time. My grandma did take photographs, which she is, good at it as the grandma in Shutter, maybe not. My grandma did go to Phoenix boarding school. That is true. She was taken when she was a little girl and put on a train, just like grandma explains in the book. All of that was pulled from stories my grandma told me about herself. The big chest of memories and photographs of my grandfather that she won't take out and look at, that exists. My grandma, that chest is still in my grandma's closet. So there's things like that I did pull. But you know, a lot of the family stuff and just like that kind of the isolation I kind of gave her, that didn't really play. My family was big, and I had a very full life there in Todacheene with my grandma, my cousins, and my aunts, and my mom. So I had that, which is very different than Rita. Rita had such a more lonely and kind of sad childhood, but I get that too because I kind of felt that as a kid growing up too. So it's all pulled, I guess, to some degree.
Let me, I was scrolling at some reviews and comments, all of which have been positive, by the way, but I'm seeing that some reviewers are labeling Shutter as being in the horror genre, which I didn't see. I see it more as a paranormal thriller. I mean, do you want to address that? I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in the horror genre, but it struck me as very, solidly in the thriller camp. But you're the author. I'll let you address that.
Well, I was kind of surprised myself that I've been really embraced by a lot of the horror writers and put in that horror category. I also agree. I didn't really feel like it's a horror book, but I think it's the gore. And I think it's like that first chapter is really shocking to some people. And I saw that a lot of reviewers are like, I really enjoyed a lot of this book, but that first chapter, like it needs, a disclaimer, or it needs a trigger warning. I get that, it is pretty intense. So I think that the gore aspect, but also I feel like it's a signal that I kind of scared some people. And for me, that's exciting. And if the horror writers are scared by what I wrote, yay, because I'm all about horror. That's kind of the stuff I grew up writing or reading and watching. I grew up on horror movies, so I'm down with that. But I always thought it was more of a coming of age story mixed with like a crime procedural thriller. I never even saw the horror thing coming. But I'm glad that they're getting spooked out enough and grossed out enough to call it horror. I'm super excited by that.
You
That's
mentioned
funny.
movies. You mentioned movies, and I would be remiss if I did not mention or ask, obviously you as an acclaimed filmmaker, to me, this seemed very cinematic, and I could see this being on the screen quite easily. Think there's any chance of that, or is there anything you can say, or too early to say?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think maybe just because I'm a filmmaker, it's a very visual story, so I could see how it could translate very easily onto the screen. Personally, I think it's too much story for a film. It's a lot, along, you know, with the current crime story, along with the childhood flashbacks. It's a hard thing to cram into 2 hours. It would be very difficult to cover that kind of story in 2 hours. So I always thought, even though I would love to make a film out of it, you know, it'd probably be better as a series, because it's just so much information and so much story to cover. It'd be hard to do it in 2 hours. So, you know, it is a little early to say. It hasn't even been out a week, you know, but they're talking. That's all I could say. They're talking, and I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Well, that's just what I was going to say was fingers crossed. And you know, if there's anything I've learned with Winter Counts over the last 2 years, it's in Hollywood you have to hurry up and wait. I've had the novel option, and then the rights are up again. I can't really talk about it right now, and so these things take a long time. But you know, let me come back to this, because you are one of the really unusual breed. You know, you have this acclaimed career as a documentary filmmaker, and now an acclaimed novelist. How do they differ in terms of your creative process? What's the difference? Can you address that? Because I know almost nothing here. How does it differ in creating a film versus writing a novel? Is it a different process, or does it all come from the same place? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, you know, I think the one identifier I can say for sure that both of them contain is research. I do a ton of research to do the fiction, and the research I do for documentary is on the ground. I am more of a verite filmmaker, so my husband and I will go film, and our story develops as the story develops. I don't have any preconceived script that I'm directing people to do or telling people what to do. They tell me, you know, like the last film, well, you know, my last film that came out on PBS, The Mayors of Shiprock, we worked on that for 5 years, and it was like these kids telling me, you know, we're going to have an event. We're going to do a wood chopping day for elders, and we're going to deliver wood to elders, and that's what we're doing today. And we're going to be there on Saturday. We're starting at 10. And I would have to get, you know, we'd have to get ourselves up there at 10 o'clock to film with them all day. And I didn't dictate that story. I didn't decide that they should go out and do this event to make my film look better. And I didn't tell them what time to start or do it. They told me, and I just showed up and documented it. And I film what happens. I don't affect what's going on. So as we're filming, the script is being developed, the story is laying itself out visually in front of me, and we go from there. But I'm a strange filmmaker. A lot of filmmakers don't work that way. They have their own script that they're doing, they have questions, and they'll even guide their interviewer. Like if they don't like their answer, they'll say, well, can you word it differently? Can you say it like this? I don't do that. I think that's like the biggest cheat of documentary film. You're making a film about real life. You don't stick your finger in it and tell people how to answer the question, or maybe they stuttered and you didn't like the way they did it. So what? That's the way they talk. Like, I'm just not one of those people who is like, no, let's have you repeat it 2 or 3 times until I like it for my documentary. That's not documentary. That's real. That's like, I don't even know what that is. Reality TV. I don't even know. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so visually telling the story and letting it unfold, and that's basically the research of the documentary filmmaker for me as a verite filmmaker, which is different. I kind of know what we're doing, but it's up to them to tell the story. It's their story. I'm just there to film it, edit it together, and get it to PBS. And you know, what they want and what story they want to tell is important. It's not my story, it's their story. So I'm there to just do it. So for doing when you do a novel, it's a completely different thing, but it's just me alone in the middle of this office in the corner of my living room, and the TV is most likely playing, and my son's running in and asking me what's for dinner. And you know, my husband's coming back from work or doing his sculpture, and it's like this, you know, that's it. That's me writing in the corner with my headphones on, and trying to get a couple pages out every day. and it took a long time, you know, because it took 10 years to write this book, because, you know, getting an MFA and getting a production company and I was doing the Mayor of the Shiprock at the same time I was writing this book, and doing the MFA is like insanity. Plus filming at the MFA program too, so it just never ends. You've always got something on your plate, you know. So, but I'm ready to retire from videography. I feel like I'm ready. But I have 3 more documentaries and a docuseries to finish, and then I'm seriously thinking about not being a director of photography anymore, or carrying all that heavy gear around anymore, or hustling really hard for little tiny bits of funding from PBS. Yeah, I'm almost ready to retire from that. It's hard. It's hard being a documentary filmmaker.
It sounds that way. You know, I hesitate to ask this because you just told us that it took you 10 years to write this, and how well I understand that. It's tough to get time to write. I'm at the MacDowell Artist Residency right now for 3 weeks just to try and crank out Wisdom Corner, the sequel to Winter Counts. It's tough when you have kids and everything else, but will we see Rita again? I noticed that the door was left open. I would love to see Rita again. Again, is it too early to say, or can you address that at all?
No, there will be. I said a trilogy would probably be my max, because I don't want to, you know, wear poor Rita out. I feel like three novels is a good stretch for her. So yes, I am also in the process of doing the second book. I'm supposed to have it done by December. Fingers crossed, you know. But the thing about it is, the process is a lot easier this time, I think, because I know my characters. I know Rita very well. I don't have to worry about that. I know Grandma very well, and I know what the next storyline is going to be, and I've already started it. And of course, I've been doing all of my research. I've been reading a ton about serial killers and the Catholic Church, and those are the only hints I'm giving you. So, but the second book is definitely happening. Yeah, and the third book is on the periphery. I haven't decided what to call it or exactly what the storyline is yet, but it's happening there. It's stewing in my brain. With the second
David, if I could introduce a comment. I thought of this all along as a crime thriller. I mean, from the moment I picked it up reading it, it never even occurred to me that it might be in horror. But what I thought was, what really struck me, having already mentioned other authors that I have read, was that this is an urban story. I mean, most of where this book takes place is in Albuquerque, in a city. We're not on a reservation. We're not, you know, and I thought that made it really unusual so far in the annals of crime fiction with Native backgrounds. Patrick, did you have that same reaction?
Yeah. Although it does go back and forth in time, you know.
Yeah, I know.
I liked the alternating points of view.
But the opening and the closing, and you know, so much is actually in Albuquerque, you know, and I found that, I mean, Albuquerque is an interesting city. I think of it, perhaps unfairly, as a very working class city. You know, I don't think of it as a real glamour kind of a city. And in fact, you know, when you wind this up in the upholstery shop, you know, I thought that was perfect, you know, for Albuquerque. So I like that a lot. I thought that set it apart and made it just to remind us that we all live together, you know, that people are not sequestered in various places. David, was that a feature of the book that appealed to you as well?
It was, but I mean, to me, what was most interesting was the alternating timelines, which is not easy to do as a writer, and to make both storylines compelling, which absolutely worked here. the prose, I remember reading your prose early on, Ramona, and let me tell you, it's different. It's good. I mean, it was great before, but you just took it to a new level in this book. Because again, we've known each other for a long time. We've been reading each other's work for a long time, and the prose in this book is great. So there was so much to like. The construct, the urbanity of it, the dual timelines. There's just a lot to like, folks. So please do yourselves a favor, pick up this book.
Wonderful. Well, let's see if Patrick has any questions to address from the audience.
Let's see. I spread the net out there, but I have a couple I wouldn't mind throwing in if you don't mind. Can we talk just a little bit about, Rita's? Do you view it as a gift or a curse? In some ways, it's both. For her, and also maybe a little bit more about how her job. The fascinating dynamic for me is that, her job is not as an investigator. Her job is to document. And maybe without spoiling things, if it's possible, can you explain a little bit about how her gift, her sight kind of manifests itself? What exactly does she see? Does she, or maybe that is a spoiler.
Well, I think the cool thing about the ghost world is there are no rules, at least in mine. And I think there's a lot of things that I could have pulled stuff from, like the whole, like an American Werewolf in London. I really enjoyed how his friends would come back and they would like continue to decay. Like the longer they were there, they would get grosser and grosser. And I thought, oh, I wonder if that's how they should be. Or is it just lights? Or, is it like shadows or smoke? Like there's so many different ways that these things can appear. And so for me, I felt like there should be no rules. They can appear how they want to appear because they can do what they want. And so if you notice in Shutter, sometimes they're dead, like she sees them as they died. Sometimes they're just lights. Sometimes they're voices. Sometimes it's just like her cousin comes back and it's a smell, or it's a light or it's a heat. So there is no rule. It comes in as it wants to come in. And that's what's so horrible about it. That's because she can't control that. She can't control how the ghosts come in, how they look, how they are. And I thought it was better to keep it that way because for me, that's more terrifying. Maybe it's like my years of being a taskmaster and a control freak on a film set. So like that idea of losing control and not having any control and letting this whole world of ghosts dictate how your life is moving was super frightening.
And then the taboos, you alluded to briefly, if I'm not mistaken, that's the main conflict between, why she left the reservation to begin with. Are some of those strong taboos, those traditions, are they still in place as strongly as they were in generations past?
Absolutely. Navajos have this whole unspoken set of rules that are just ridiculous. If you followed every rule, you'd probably never leave your house. Like you can't brush your teeth after it gets dark. You can't whistle at night. You can't brush your hair or have your hair cut at certain times. You can't watch a snake while it's eating. You can't look at an eclipse because, there's a million rules. It's insanity. And I thought, well, with all the death rules, I really started doing research about we can't touch dead people. We can't say their names. We can't talk about them. We have these people that we hire to guide our own relatives into death. It just seemed like such a horrible thing, death, And so I started to look into traditional Navajo beliefs and that idea of passing into the next world, not necessarily it being a bad thing, but just moving on to your next realm of existence. So this whole death, being afraid of death, through my research, it looked to me like it's rooted in the Spanish flu epidemic and on the Navajo reservation, because all of the quarantine rules that went along with that pandemic are directly correlated to some of the beliefs that Navajos have, like you can't be in the same house with the person that's dying. You have to set them apart from the rest of the family. Like, and it's kind of, and I kind of started to realize, like, wait a minute, are we so afraid of death? Because, and rightfully so, because so many of our people were killed during this flu pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic. I mean, it struck the Navajo Nation bad. We lost thousands and thousands of people to this. And I think it directly is correlated to how we believe about death now and how we're so afraid to touch our dead or talk about our dead because we're afraid we might bring that sickness to us. So, you know, all of that like seems to me related in this history of colonization and of Spanish flu and all of that stuff that was happening in the 1800s to the Navajo people, and right, you know, and leading up to the long walk. So I really believe that our beliefs are directly connected to those historical happenings, and I think as a nation, as a people, that we're going to have to discuss and deal with some of these taboos and talk about how we're dealing with it, because it's allowing for, you know, people to take advantage of Navajos who lose a family member and who are forced into non-traditional funerary expenses, you know, to float the funerary industry around the Navajo Nation.
So Rita can, you get the sense that she can kind of grasp beyond the veil a little bit, you know, she can see beyond the veil.
Like she knows, I think she has an emotional connection enough to know when there's a bad person or a good person, what they want is something that she can do or cannot do. And she just chooses to separate herself because that's what she's been taught. But with Irma, there's no separation. Like that lady's not going to let her go.
Right.
That's the danger that everybody warns her about. There's going to be somebody who's more powerful than you know. So
yeah, it's interesting because just for the people watching, and this isn't a spoiler because it's right at the beginning of the book. I mean, this character, you know, falls off, or maybe not falls off a freeway overpass, and you know, part of the setup is that our character Rita, you know, knows the truth or sees the truth, and the character tells her, you know, hey, this isn't what really happened. I didn't fall off this freeway overpass, and so that sets this interesting plot in motion.
But you had a good point before. She's really not an investigator. She's a documenter.
She's a documenter, and so that put her at odds with the people that are investigating the crime.
Right. And how do you tell them that you know this information? Like, how do you do that? You can't.
Right.
So she's kind of stuck because you can't just say, "Oh well, you know, the ghost told me."
But then there is. It's interesting because there is, and I wanted to ask you this about, you know, you do hear about police departments occasionally utilizing psychic, you know, mediums in certain ways. I don't know.
Yeah, it's you know, I did some research on that too, and you know, there are departments that still use psychics, and you know, especially for missing people, you know, but I think that there's still a good, healthy dose of skepticism in the police department for anything like that, especially, you know, here in New Mexico. I think that there's a little tongue-in-cheek there about how people feel about Native beliefs, and like the whole witchery thing. And so I think people are kind of on the fence here in New Mexico about that. I've never heard of a New Mexico police department using the psychic. I know there was some lady who said she was psychic a few years ago or something like that, or she worked for the police department, but I don't know if that's true. I've never seen it, and I've never seen it documented. So, but I do think that there's a deep threaded tradition and belief, not only in the Native community, but like in the Mexican community, in the Spanish community. There's like heavy Catholicism here, like penitentes are from New Mexico. So like there's a heavy religious back here in New Mexico that we have, that's just not in the Native community, it's in every community.
But it's called the land of enchantment, which right there, I think, you know, I love the New Mexico license plate. It's such a wonderful.
We call it the land of entrapment.
Well, my husband lived in New Mexico for over 30 years, and we still spend our summers in New Mexico. And there are a lot of funny stories, about New Mexico. Do you need a passport?
Don't
Other
drink the
things.
water.
Yep, that kind of thing. David, let me ask you, give us a preview about your upcoming book, because Winter Counts, it's been a little while now since Winter Counts, not to nag. What's going on with you?
Well, I'm working on the book right now. It's called Wisdom Corner, and I don't know yet about a release date. It has been almost exactly 2 years since Winter Counts came out. I've been promoting this book and talking and doing things almost nonstop for 2 years, and so getting some writing time. I have 2 teenage sons, has not been easy. I'm thrilled to be here at McDowell, and I'm going to Wyoming, Ucross in a few weeks, so it's been thrilled to have a little time to write. But I can tell you that Wisdom Corner, all of the same characters will be back, along with some cool new characters. A new character that I'm having a lot of fun with is Pudge Ironshell, who's a bootlegger. Ramona, I don't know if you have bootleggers on the Navajo reservation, but we do. Now, I say bootleggers to most people, and they think of somebody like brewing moonshine in the Appalachian Mountains, But that's not what a bootlegger is on a reservation. A bootlegger is someone who crosses state lines, buys alcohol, because most reservations are dry, or many are, and then they sell liquor on the res at an inflated price, at a markup. Well, my guy Pudge is the ethical bootlegger on the Rosebud Reservation. And so there's a plot twist involving him. So I'm having a lot of fun with some new characters. So Wisdom Corner, it's taking shape right now.
That sounds awesome. That sounds so fun. And then there's always a bootlegger. On the Navajo res, it's always like a Sani, like an old lady in a trailer that sells the brew on Sunday, because you can't buy beer on Sunday, not in McKinley County. So they're out there. I've seen that lonely trailer way out on the dirt. That's probably it.
Single wide out there.
Yeah. No AC, one window in the back.
Yeah.
Anything else, Patrick, that is creepy?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously quite a love of photography and a reverence for the actual art of photography in the book. I mean, you show us a lot of very procedural stuff. It's interesting. I mentioned Soho being on such a roll. Gary Phillips, he has that book called One Shot Harry that's out, about we all know the book about a crime, not really a crime scene Ouija type photographer, but kind of, sort of, in the early 60s, also documenting social change and what was going on at that time. I'm talking myself into a corner because I don't really have a question to ask you. It was mainly just that part of the book being so interesting is the details about procedure and photography.
I'm sorry. Did you say? Go ahead.
Oh, I was like, I've been more of a moving picture person, like the videography part of it. So it took me a while to actually learn the photography part of forensics. My first couple of forensic sessions with people turned out bad. My boss got on to me. I got in a lot of trouble. I just didn't understand how it worked. So I had to go through a significant amount of training with my boss to get the shots we're supposed to get. Especially wounds, like people would come in with wounds and we'd have to take photographs of them, and you had to be super precise. And you had to get it right the first time, because if you didn't, you were in trouble.
Is a forensic photographer and a crime scene photographer the same thing, or are there differences?
There's differences. Crime scene photographer is somebody who's on the scene. They get called in and they do that work. And they could spend hours there. That's like Rita. That's what she does. I was more of a forensic photographer, and a videographer, which means I do the after business of the case. So like after the body's been removed and all of that stuff, I'm the one who does the depositions for the case. I'm the one that does all the video enhancements and the photography that goes along with that to get it ready for court. I was that person. And I would get like the bank robbery footage from the police, and I'd have to enhance it, zoom in on telephones or license plates. That was my job. That's the kind of stuff I did. I was in the lab doing the work, and then I did a lot of the going out and being in the field and sitting on the side of a roadside measuring traffic patterns and getting ready, like a truck barreled into a building full of ton of people, I had to show up there the next morning and document the inside of the car of the semi that went in. And it was not a great scene. It was horrible. And it was one that I will never forget. But you know, but the bodies are gone. You're there with the insurance adjuster and the attorneys to take a photograph of the inside of the vehicle so that we can see how people came into the vehicle, how people landed, where their bodies were found, measurements, all of that stuff. I'm that person that comes in after. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I couldn't help but think when in the original scene where she, you know, the opening scene where she's shooting over 1,000 photos, that digital must have made a significant difference. I mean, you know, you can read old crime novels and, you know, they're flashbulb pictures that they've taken at the scene and all, but they couldn't do anything as dramatically or as thoroughly or as, you know, as digital photography. You'd never take 1,000 photos, so you wouldn't even be able to develop 1,000 photos.
When I started doing forensics, we still had film.
Well, that's what I wondered. Did you make that transition from film to digital?
Yeah, I did, and film and video camera too, like from videotape. Like that whole idea of tape versus digital was something that took me a long time to get over. Like I was like, wait, your whole movie's on this little disc? I don't believe it. It took me a long time to make that switch. But for the photograph, yeah, I remember having to go send photographs to the lab, to Walgreens if we needed it really fast, and having to go get it developed. And I mean, that was my early days. I'd say maybe 6 or 7 years into the job, we started moving to digital, and it started to be on cards. And we started to film video on cards too, which was a very strange transition for me to make. So yeah, I was working in forensics as the world was making that change from analog to digital, and kind of Rita is too. If you notice, the photographs or each chapter has a different kind of camera underneath you, so it's there for you to keep track of what year it is, because that camera came out on that year, and that's why I did that, so that people could understand what year it was. And at the end, that camera model came out in 2005, so you understand that this story takes place between like 75 and 2005. And that's how I did it, just the camera model.
Hey, Ramona, do you have a copy of the book handy?
I think so. It might be I don't know.
I'm gonna ask her to read the opening paragraph because it's such a killer. Beautiful. Would you mind reading just the opening paragraph?
No, actually, my opening paragraph had been reduced to like a sentence or two, and I begged Juliet to let me put all that stuff back in that it started with, because actually it was twice the size that it is now. So she allowed me to bring like 2 more sentences back. Very late in the editing session because I begged. So I'm glad you liked it. That was my favorite. Sure, but I can do that. Souls don't scatter like the rest of the body. They latch on for as long as they can, their legs pull to the sky, fingertips white in desperation. Souls are grasping for us, for the ones they left behind, and for the truth only they can see. They are the best witnesses to their last breath. I stand in the bitter cold wind with that ghost and take its picture.
Very dramatic. It's a tremendous opener. Really powerful book. And thank you so much for taking time to share it with us. And David, thank you for taking time to join us. I'm so delighted. The minute I read your opening paragraph, I thought I will write to David and see if he happens to be free, because you'd obviously be the right person. So it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for signing our books. For those of you who don't have a copy, we do have a few left. I have to do a commercial moment here. Which will make Soho happy as well. And we'll look forward to your next. And David, we'll certainly look forward to whatever news you've got for us whenever you get it, right?
Maybe we can have you both out here in person next time.
That'd be really exciting.
Be thrilled, and my congratulations to Ramona. Congrats, Ramona. It's such a thrill to see this book hit the stand. So wonderful.
Thank you so much, Dave, for the awesome blurb and for coming and taking a break from your major writing to come out and hang out with us tonight. And thank you, Barbara and Patrick, for inviting me and having this event.
It's really a great pleasure. So thank you all very much. Good night, everybody. Thanks for
Good
joining us.
night.